Okay, so let's jump right in. We're going to Germany. The year is 1525. And what's happening is, well, it's the largest popular uprising in Europe before the French Revolution.
It really is. And this is a story about ordinary people, farmers, laborers, who are pushing back against incredible power.
A truly explosive moment.
It's a perfect storm, really. You have this grinding poverty and economic suffering, and it collides head-on with these brand new, world-changing religious ideas.
So let's start with that suffering. I mean, what was daily life actually like back then? It's hard to even imagine.
It's defined by just constant back-breaking labor and scarcity. You're tied to a piece of land your whole life, you're pretty much always hungry, and you know that most of what you produce is going to someone else.
That's the feudal system, right? The local lord owns everything.
Everything. The land, and in a way, the people on it, we're talking about serfs, they had these incredibly high taxes on their crops, but what was just as bad was the mandatory unpaid labor.
Wait, unpaid labor.
Oh, yeah. It was called corvée. You had to stop working on your own little plot of land, the one that feeds your family, and go work on the lord's private grounds for free. For days, sometimes weeks. It felt like theft.
And things were getting worse, not better.
Exactly. The population was growing, but the amount of good farmland wasn't. So food is getting scarcer, and it feels like every single year the lords are demanding just a little bit more, pushing people right to the edge of starvation.
And on top of all that, you had the church tax.
Right. Another layer, this was the tithe. And what really made people angry was the difference between the great tithe and the small tithe.
Okay, what's the difference there?
Well, the great tithe was on your main crops, like grain. It was a lot, but it was kind of expected. The small tithe, though, that was on everything else. The eggs from your chickens, the vegetables in your garden, the wool from your few sheep.
So it felt much more personal.
So personal, it felt like they were reaching right into your kitchen garden, the one keeping your kids from going hungry. And when the peasants later wrote down their demands, getting rid of that small tithe was a huge deal for them.
And this lack of freedom, it went way beyond just money and work.
Totally. As serfs, you couldn't move to the next town without the Lord's permission. You couldn't even get married without his okay.
So you were just stuck.
Completely. And one of the things that really, really angered people was what happened to the common lands. The forests and streams used to be for everyone, for firewood, for fishing.
Resources the whole community relied on.
Right. But the nobility had basically just taken them, fenced them off for their own private hunting parties. So you have starving people watching the rich use resources they need to survive for sport. It created this deep, simmering sense of injustice.
Okay, so that's the tinder. It's all dry and ready to catch fire. What's the spark?
The spark is theological. It's the Reformation, Martin Luther.
Right in the middle of all this frustration.
Mm-hmm. And his message, thanks to the new printing press, spreads like wildfire. His core idea is that every single person can have a direct relationship with God. You don't need a priest or a bishop as a middleman.
And the ultimate authority is the Bible, not the church.
Exactly. So the peasants hear this idea of spiritual freedom.
And they immediately connect it to their actual physical lives.
They make a huge leap. If the Bible is the only real authority, then why should we obey a lord or a bishop who says their power comes from God? What if it doesn't?
Suddenly the whole system, the one that's kept them poor for centuries, seems like it's man-made, not divinely ordered.
It gives them a weapon, a religious justification to question everything.
And then you have these traveling preachers showing up in the villages.
Yes, and they are fanning the flames. They're telling people that God does not want them to live like slaves. They frame the uprising as a holy mission, which gives people incredible courage.
And that energy very quickly becomes organized.
It does. In early 1525, representatives from peasant groups all across southern Germany meet in a town called Memmingen. And they create this incredible document.
The 12 Articles of Memmingen.
And what's amazing is how structured it is. This isn't just an angry mob shouting. This is a formal political program. They printed thousands of copies, and it united all these different rebel groups.
So what were they actually asking for?
Well, their demands were actually pretty practical at first. First, they wanted every community to have the right to choose its own pastor, putting religious power back in their hands.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, they wanted to get rid of that small tithe we talked about, and they wanted to reduce the amount of unpaid labor they had to do.
And third,
they wanted the common lands back, the forests, the rivers, and they used the Bible to justify it, saying that early Christians shared everything in common. They argued it was God's justice.
But not everyone was interested in negotiating.
Not at all. And this is where a very different figure enters the story. Thomas Müntzer.
The radical.
The true revolutionary. Luther wanted to reform the church. Munzer believed the entire social order, the princes, the lords, everything, was so corrupt that it had to be violently destroyed. He thought the 12 Articles were weak.
So what was his vision?
It was almost a communist vision hundreds of years early. He didn't want better taxes. He wanted a world where all property was shared equally. To the elites, he was terrifying.
And his message was apocalyptic.
Completely. He preached that the poor were God's chosen people, and their holy mission was to punish the wicked rulers. He gave the rebellion a divine purpose.
And with that kind of energy, violence was pretty much guaranteed.
Inevitable. Peasant groups started attacking castles and monasteries, the symbols of their oppression.
And they weren't just smashing things, they were looking for something specific.
Yes, the records. The legal documents. They would storm a castle, find the room with all the ledgers and deeds that recorded their debts and their serf status, and they would burn them.
Trying to literally erase the laws that kept them in chains.
A fresh start. It was an incredibly symbolic act.
So you have these huge crowds of untrained men, armed with what? Farming tools.
Scythes, flails, clubs, whatever they had, and they're going up against professional soldiers.
And in the middle of all this, everyone is waiting to see what Martin Luther will do. The man who started it all.
And his reaction is the great controversial twist to the whole story.
Turns against them.
Vehemently. It was a crisis for him. Luther believed in what he called the two kingdoms, the spiritual kingdom of God and the earthly kingdom of rulers. For him, Christians had to obey the earthly rulers no matter what.
So when the peasants used the Bible to justify a violent earthly rebellion?
He saw it as a terrible sin, a perversion of his entire message. So he writes this unbelievably brutal pamphlet.
Against the murdering, thieving hordes of peasants.
The title says it all. He tells the princes to stab, smite, slay whoever can. He basically gives them religious permission to be as brutal as possible to restore order.
And that's a green light for the nobility.
It's all the justification they need for an all-out military crackdown.
And militarily, this was never going to be a fair fight.
Not at all. The peasant armies were huge, but they had no real training, no central command, and they had a huge logistical problem.
The harvest.
The harvest. Guys had to leave the battlefield to go home and bring in the crops, otherwise their families would starve that winter. You can't run a professional army that way.
Meanwhile, the nobles have professional mercenaries, heavy cavalry.
And the real game changer, technology. They had cannons.
So the peasants are lining up with spears, and the other side has artillery.
Exactly. The peasants tried defensive tactics, like circling their wagons to create a fort, but a cannonball goes right through a wooden cart.
Which all leads to the final decisive battle, Frankenhausen.
The turning point. Thomas Munzer's there, leading the rebels. He's trying to keep their spirits up, telling them God is on their side.
And there's that story about the rainbow, right?
Yeah, a rainbow appears, and he points to it as a sign from God, a promise of protection. He convinces them to stay and fight.
It was a fatal mistake.
Yeah. A massacre. The noble army surrounds them and just opens fire with their cannons. The peasant lines shatter instantly. It was over in a few hours. Thousands were killed.
Munzer was captured right after, wasn't he?
Captured, tortured, and publicly executed. And with his death, the radical heart of the rebellion was gone.
So with the fighting over, the retribution begins.
And it was savage. The nobles wanted to make an example of them, to instill so much fear that no one would ever dare to do this again. Historians think maybe 100,000 peasants were killed in total.
Executed without trials?
Executed, blinded, maimed. Their farms were seized. Their villages were hit with crippling fines. It was brutal.
And for the survivors, did anything change for the better?
No. It got worse. The lords tightened their control even more. All the rights they demanded in the 12 Articles, they wouldn't see those for another 200 years.
And what about the Reformation?
It became much more conservative. By siding with the princes, Luther tied the fate of Protestantism to the state, not to the people. It lost its revolutionary edge.
So for the average person, life just went back to the same hard routine.
A harder routine, actually. Heavy taxes, forced labor, and now with the trauma and fear layered on top, the problems weren't solved. They were just violently suppressed.
So when we look back, why does this war still matter so much?
Because it's one of the first great organized fights by common people for what we would now call human rights. It's this incredible mix of religious passion and economic desperation.
And the 12 Articles themselves are so important. A written demand for freedom, long before the American or French revolutions.
Absolutely. It shows how a powerful idea can ignite a movement. But it also shows the brutal cost of challenging an established power structure.
That while ideas can spark a revolution, power, especially military power, often has the final say. It's a really hard lesson.
It is. Think about that tension between idealism and the reality of power. Good luck with your studies.